want to preface this by saying two things. First and foremost, there are parts of this story I don't fully remember. My memories of these events, especially towards the climax, are not quite accurate. Where my memory has failed me, I have found those people who were involved and asked them to fill in the blanks for me. The second thing I must preface this story with is that this story is of a period of my life that I both deeply regret and am very ashamed of. This isn't your average stalker story. You see, I wasn't the victim here. I was the stalker. And I'm gonna carry that shame with me to the grave. In 7th grade, I was very unusual. I had long before chosen to stop feeling emotions like affection, deciding that they only caused pain. I didn't want to suffer rejection and the like, so I forced myself not to feel. I was very much a loner, and I was content with that. That year, though, things changed. I went to a small Catholic school with only 58 students in my grade, so everyone seemed to know everyone. I had only just transferred into the school, though. I was an outsider, an unknown. I barely knew anybody, and most people didn't really care to put forth the effort to get to know me, which, honestly, was fine with me at the time. School was school, and I didn't really have many friends. I was fairly isolated, yet I was content with that. I was, and to a degree still am, happy being alone. One day, this girl whose locker was next to mine asked me what the homework was. I was the type who made sure to write that stuff down and was generally irritated with people who didn't, but I also had a kind streak in me. So, after a mild chastisement, I told her the homework for that night. This pattern continued for about a week before she asked me a new question. What is my name? Now, being the disinterested type of person I was at the time, I hadn't bothered to learn anybody's names. I just didn't care. So, I told her I didn't know her name, and she told me what it was. For the sake of anonymity, we'll call her M. And I promptly forgot it. It wasn't important to me, after all. The next day, after asking what the homework was, she asked me what her name was again. I didn't remember, so she told me again. This pattern repeated for over a month, which began to irritate me. I eventually made sure to remember her name, if only to reduce the amount of time I had to deal with her. One day, she stopped asking, and for some reason, that bothered me. She didn't ask about the homework, didn't ask me what her name was, didn't talk to me. And it bothered me. Something that just the day prior had annoyed me, I seemed to miss. I was confused, uncertain why I felt that way. I asked her the next day why she hadn't asked me what her name was, and she simply told me that, since I had learned it and clearly remembered it, she didn't think it necessary to keep asking. A good enough explanation, but somehow one that left me feeling still confused. Not with why she was no longer speaking with me, but with why it continued to bother me that she was no longer speaking with me. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice her more, for lack of a better term. The way she looked, the way she walked, the way she talked. I noticed where M sat in class, who she talked to, all manners of things that normally I didn't care about. As our grade was very small, we shared most of the same classes, so I saw her often. I watched her, noticing all these little things about her, and finding myself thinking about her a lot more. And that confused me further. As I said, I tried to make myself stop feeling emotions like affection or even attachment, so the very fact that I found myself thinking about her was foreign to me. I didn't understand what the feeling of butterflies in my stomach I got when M looked at me was. I didn't understand why I'd find myself wishing I could see her again. I didn't know what the joy when she and I knelt next to each other at our lockers, pulling together our things before leaving school, meant. It confused me, as I said. So I did the thing that made sense to me and asked my mom. She told me that it sounded like I had a crush on her. Suddenly, it made sense. I liked this girl. I really did. Now the question was, what on earth was I supposed to do about it? I decided to take the route that would, in the end, drag me into a madness that would plague me and her for years. I wrote a note, confessing my feelings for her, and stuck it in her locker in just such a way that it would pop out when she opened it. I didn't tell her face to face. She sent a friend, once she got the note, to tell me she liked me, too. I was, officially, out of my depth. I knew my feelings I'd denied myself for so long, were being reciprocated. I just had no idea what to do with that knowledge. So I simply continued doing what I'd been doing, admiring her from afar, rarely approaching her or talking to her. I suppose this is the point where the stalking, in part, actually began. As time passed and my feelings for her grew from afar, I noticed her talking to another boy. He was a year younger than us, a 6th grader we'll call S, who was, frankly, much better looking than me. I started to hear rumors that she liked him and that they might even be dating. I thought that was ridiculous. M liked me, not S. Me. It started to become more apparent as time passed that there was some truth to this rumor. She seemed to spend more time with him at recess and at lunch. They would sit together. I started to feel a new feeling, another one that I didn't understand at the time. I felt angry towards him. I wanted her to myself, in spite of the fact that I had only sat around and watched her. I felt like she was mine. And then came the pain I dreaded, the pain that caused me to not want to feel anything anymore. I had a friend who we will call W for the brief part he plays in this story, who ended up adding to this plan. He would tell me all kinds of things about her. At first, they were good things, that in the classes I wasn't in, M would talk about me. W would tell me about all the nice things she'd say, and I believed every word. As time passed, and S entered the scene, W would start telling me new stories. Stories about how M loved S, how she would talk about him all the time in class. At one point, W even told me M and S had had sex. That one cut me deep and left me angrier than ever. As I mentioned earlier, I was a very isolated person at that time. I would come home and go straight to my room to be alone. I would fantasize about all kinds of things. Lives I would rather lead. Adventures I wished I could go on. So, when this pain started, this perceived rejection, I did what had become normal to me. I created a fantasy. I imagined a world where Em and I were together, where she liked me and not that S upstart. This probably couldn't have happened at a worse time, though. It was almost summer. My summers were spent in almost complete isolation. I had few friends, and while my mom believed I had more friends, the reality was that the people I would end up going to spend time with were no longer my friends. They were my brother's friends and the children of my mother's friends, but not my friends. My brother and his friends would torment me for fun, and my mom wouldn't notice, which pushed me farther into my fantasy world. A world where I was safe, where I was happy. A world where now I had a girlfriend. I spent a bit of time with W as well, hanging out. He continued to tell me things that I now know were lies. Things about M that hurt me, yet that I believed. Things that pushed me even further into my fantasy world. Things that drove me deeper into my madness. I asked him why, years after the fact, he would tell me things like that if they weren't actually true. W told me that it was because he could tell I was going off the deep end, so to speak, and thought it was funny to push me further into this fantasy, to see my reactions to his lies. And he admitted to lying to me in order to do exactly that. I still can't forgive W for it. As summer progressed, I began to write love letters to M. Letters which I never actually sent. Letters to the fantasy M, and not the real one. Ones where I professed my undying love for her, where I would talk about the fantasy dates we'd gone on. In one, which will come into play later, I promised to protect her from any and every threat, no matter what the threat was. In my fantasy, I'd hand-deliver the letters to M, and she would read them and be happy. Happy to be with me. Happy to have such a caring, loving boyfriend. You know, the things I wanted M to feel in this faux world I created for myself. The line between fantasy and reality became blurred for me as summer passed, and I retreated deeper into my fantasy world to escape the pain of the real one. I was happy there, as I said. The next year, I went to a new school. I didn't want to, of course. I wanted to go back to the Catholic school and be with my girlfriend, M. My parents, however, were adamant that I go to the public school, after they had had some issues with the school administration over things unrelated to my burgeoning stalker behavior. If memory serves, it was over my parents refusing to buy the school uniforms from the uniform company, and instead buying the exact same type of clothes from Target. One interesting thing happened at the public school. Several of the kids from the school I had been attending the year prior would wait outside my new school for the bus to pick them up and take them to the school I had been at. Simply put, the Catholic school didn't have a designated bus route, so the bus would pick up all the kids and drop them off at my new school, where they would wait for another bus to pick them up and drop them off near the Catholic school before continuing on to the high school. I would ask them about what was going on back at the school I'd left, and tried to ask about M. I'd try to ask in a way that wouldn't be too overt, but looking back, I'm not sure why. Maybe part of me knew the romance I'd experienced over the summer had never really taken place. They'd tell me things, of course, but they started trying to talk to me less and less about M. I think they caught on that what I was doing was abnormal, that something might be wrong with me. I may as well insert something here that likely needs clarification. I had no idea that anything I was doing was out of the ordinary. I thought that this was completely normal behavior, and wasn't sure why they would be avoiding telling me things about her. As time progressed, I began to believe, truly believe, that there was a conspiracy afoot here. That S was trying to keep me away from her so he could steal her, and was using the other students to make sure I was kept out of the loop. My fantasy world, one which I was living in more and more, evolved at this point. Now, I had an enemy to overcome, an adversary to defeat. The world I had created became a shade darker, a bit more sinister. I learned where this boy lived, which was in my neighborhood, coincidentally, and would ride my bike past his house and simply glare at it. I would fantasize about burning it down, about blowing it up, and saving M, who I was obsessed with, from him. In my fantasy, I was a hero. If I had actually done it, which thankfully I didn't, I would have been a villain. I would find out much later, long after these events took place, that they had broken up. At the time, though, I had no way of knowing that. As the school year passed, I wrote more letters to her, never once sending them, but keeping them to myself. I think I may have kept them because, in my fantasy, I had hand-delivered them. In the years since, I have found most of these letters. I'm deeply disturbed by the things I wrote, and looking back, it's almost as if they were written by someone else. If it wasn't for them being written in my fairly unique handwriting, I write in cursive only and it's quite sloppy, I might even have believed the letters I found weren't from me. They were often about how I missed her, and how I would defeat this conspiracy, which didn't actually exist, and save her. The letters grew steadily more dark and more violent towards this conspiracy. Never once was the violence directed at her, only those around her. I spent the next summer almost completely isolated, leaving only for a single summer class before returning home and shutting myself away in my room, and as such, in my fantasy world. I don't remember much of this period, which I can confirm was real, save only that I was no longer happy in my fantasy world. The next year was high school, and on the second day of school, I saw M again. I thought she was more beautiful than ever, and fell harder than ever in love, and deeper into madness. I began learning her schedule, figuring out which routes to her next class she would take. I would watch her from the shadows, and in my little false world, I would be walking with her, talking to her. I would sneak out of my house and go stand near her house and watch it, to protect her. Being that close to her, to the place she lived, made me feel good. It made the fantasy happier again. My parents never once noticed me doing this, since I was, and still am, a very stealthy person. Oddly enough, though, these fantasies never took on a sexual aspect. They were, at that point, either fantasies of going out on dates with her or saving her from some giant nameless conspiracy or monster, making her swoon over me as the hero I believed I was. More often than not, it was the latter fantasy, and it would steadily grow more violent. I know of one incident where, while walking home from school, I ran into her. I would, later on, convince myself that we had had a long and pleasant conversation. Years later, Em told me that I had just said hi, multiple times. She had been walking with a friend, a fact I didn't actually remember, and I had walked up next to them, said hi, then slowed down enough to be behind them before speeding up enough to catch up and repeat the process. She told me that it was very awkward, but that she had tried to be nice to me and kept saying hi back every single time. I feel I must point out again that, at the time, I didn't realize that anything I was doing was out of the ordinary. At the time, this seemed completely normal to me. I had, in all honesty, gone mad. It's hard to write down what exactly happened that year, in no small part because of how far into my fantasy I'd retreated. I have many memories of that year, but after trying to piece together what actually happened later, I've discovered that many of those memories are of events that happened only in my mind. They seem real to me, even now, but I now know that they aren't. I do know this, though. I had, beyond a shadow of a doubt, become a stalker. I didn't realize it at the time, but I know that for a fact now. As I don't correctly remember the events after the first 2 months or so of my freshman year of high school, I'm gonna have to rely heavily on what I learned later. Em began to notice me popping up all over the place and, at first, believed it was coincidence. The more often it happened, though, the more she realized there was something wrong. I would ask her friends about her all the time, what she was doing, if she remembered me at all, if she was dating anybody. I apparently asked that one a lot. She started becoming creeped out by me, and understandably so. I'm also told that I had taken to talking to myself noticeably, having actual conversations at a volume one would normally use, with empty spaces, holding doors open for people who didn't even exist. I was very much lost in my fantasy world at that point, and the line between reality and fantasy had been completely obliterated. In my fantasy world, this conspiracy I'd invented was everywhere. My fantasy had, toward the end of these events, become violent. Gone were the happy stories I'd tell myself, replaced with grotesque, often bloody struggles with the S, who, for whatever reason, was still the focus of my hatred. In April of 2005, 2 events that took place in quick succession finally ripped me out of my fantasy and ended my stalking of this poor girl. The first was that, out of boredom one weekend, I took a self-evaluation test in a book we had. The book, the American Medical Association Family Medical Guide, had 99 different self-administered tests in the form of flowcharts. Basically, it would ask you if you had a certain symptom, and based on your answer, it would lead you to another question and, eventually, to a diagnosis. All the tests led to nothing until I reached the mental health section. I went through the whole flowchart and reached a diagnosis: psychosis. I was unsurprisingly confused. How can I be psychotic? I thought. I'm not detached from reality. I know what's real and what isn't. I couldn't understand how that could be true. I didn't believe I was doing anything abnormal. I couldn't see that I was living in a fantasy, yet the diagnosis stuck in my mind. It wouldn't go away. I just couldn't comprehend how I'd gotten that diagnosis. It planted a seed of doubt in my mind, though. It made me question whether or not the life I believed I was leading was real. The second event was when I was called to the dean's office. It was then that I understood, was faced with the reality of what I had become. I was told that M was afraid of me, scared that I was stalking her, scared that I would hurt her. I was told that I would be required to avoid her until she or the school deemed it no longer necessary. Told that if I continued like this, they would have no choice but to press charges against me. I was devastated, to say the least. I couldn't believe that someone would call me a stalker. I didn't want to believe it, but the seed of doubt that had been planted now grew. I started looking back on what I'd been doing, even rereading the letters I'd written, and it was as if a veil had been lifted from before my eyes. I saw the creepy things I'd been doing, read the creepy things I'd been writing. I realized I had become a stalker. It was the single most painful realization of my life. I had become a threat to a girl I had feelings for. I made her scared, and I realized she had every reason to be. I would have been scared too were our roles reversed. I had promised her I would protect her from any and all threats once, in my fantasy, as I would later realize. Now, I had become the threat. I had to protect her from myself. And so, I did the one thing I now wish I could have done so long before. I shattered the delusion. For months, I lived only in the moment, forcing myself not to enter the fantasies I used for so long for comfort. I lived every day solely for what I knew was happening, what I could definitely prove was real. It's a very hard thing to explain, truth be told, but I knew it had to be done. I had to come back to the real world, no matter how painful it was. I needed to protect M from myself. I made regular trips to the school psychologist. Yes, we had a school psychologist, several in fact, God only knows why, who would help me, provide me with a degree of therapy to help me break free from my delusion. She was instrumental in breaking me out of the delusions, helping me to become normal, more or less. I avoided M like the plague in school. It hurt for a long time, knowing where M was but not going to see her. But with time, the pain passed. The crush which had so consumed me faded. Towards the end of my senior year in high school, I ran into M by chance. I felt that as this would likely be my last chance to do so, I should speak to her. I apologized profusely to her for everything I had done, for all the fear I'd caused her, the torment, all of it. I told her I regretted it all and wished I could take it all back. And she did the one thing I didn't honestly expect her to do. She forgave me. Hey guys, KingSpook here. This story was sent to me by a viewer, and before I say anything, if you're going to leave a negative comment, just don't. Mental illness is a serious issue, and one that I myself have struggled with in the past. If anything, This story should serve as a cautionary tale. You should always make sure you know what's real and what's fantasy. This is KingSpook. If you liked the video, be sure to like, comment, and if you're new and like the content, subscribe. I'm really thankful to have you guys and to be sent stories like this, which frankly are really amazing. Have a happy Easter, you guys. KingSpook out.